Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.rent. I'm your host today, Justin Lewis, here with my friend and colleague, Tanner Wayland. Any words to share with the audience, Tanner?
Words to share. Well, I heard the word mercurial the other day on a podcast, and I thought it was really interesting. But aside from that, hi everybody. Glad to be here with you.
I do like that word. I don't know what it means, but I'll have to look that up later. Because today we are talking about something that I've actually wanted to talk about for a while. D&D is such a fun game that obviously we all love to play. And I know I say we all do stuff. I say we all a lot, but I'll try not to say that. Usually, though, when you have something that you love, you tend to invite others to join with you. And in the case of D&D, that can kind of lead to large parties and tables that are overcrowded and unmanageable games, especially for DMs. I myself suffer from the same problem. But what if you just invited someone to play for only a couple weeks, right? What if they were allowed at the table only for a little bit of time as a guest? Is that something you can do? How does that work? What might go wrong?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree that it's something that I think a lot of DMs worry about because, I mean, for a great majority of us, I would argue, we have a hard enough time just getting up the courage to ask our friends, our good friends, who are interested in D&D, to be part of a campaign or a one-shot, right? We're like, that takes about as much courage or goodwill that we have with our friends to ask that. And so the idea of inviting someone, for a one-time, gaming sesh, or someone who maybe you aren't as familiar with, or a new friend, it's kind of nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about, let's discuss, should you try having guests at your table or should you not? And let's kind of explore both options.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say that if you want to share the experience of D&D, absolutely, right? If you have a good party of players who know how to make the game fun, who you enjoy kind of DMing, then inviting someone else that you would like to introduce to the whole, to the whole genre of tabletop role playing, and especially D&D, that just seems like a win, right?
Absolutely. Honestly, it's one of the best ways to spread the hobby. And I know that sounds really weird. It's like a virus, but D&D, when you first, nowadays, D&D is being portrayed a lot more in pop culture in a positive light than it has been in the past. And that said, that makes people a little bit more willing to try it. That said, people are still seeing that it does seem to take some sort of a commitment, right? And when people ask me, how long does D&D take? I'll say, 3 to 4 hours is like a normal session that we usually play. Like, I think my group usually does 3 hours. That's kind of our standard. And when I tell them that we've been going for 3 years, they kind of balk at that, unless they're actually into it. And I think inviting someone as a guest to say, hey, we're playing this Friday. How about you just come play as a character I can help you make and see if you like it. And if you don't, that's totally fine. If you do, I'll only let you play for like 2 more sessions or something like that, right?
Yeah, and that's something to consider as well. If it's someone looking for a long-term place in your game, maybe don't give them too much false hope with just like, hey, yeah, come and join. And unless you're willing to take on another person, that's something that should always be on the table here, is like, hey, it would suck to give someone one opportunity to have fun with you and then be like, oh, we're all full over here. So maybe if you're going to invite someone for a one-time guest player experience, you should honestly be willing, if they wanted to have them join for a longer period of time, right? Because that's just being a good friend. But I
would actually
maybe
add.
Oh, go ahead.
I would actually add that you can, and I think I've done this in the past, when you invite them, explain to them that this is a short-term thing, right? That there will come a time in the story where their character will part ways and they will not be invited to play at the table anymore. And it's kind of hard saying that, right? So I wouldn't necessarily use those words. I would probably just say, hey, would you want to come play D&D with us? I want to invite you as a guest for only a couple weeks, right? Make it very clear that it's only a couple weeks, and if it goes longer, you can say, actually, can you come back one more week? But like Tanner said, if you don't say that, you will have to be willing to have that conversation of, I should have told you this, and you're probably going to hurt someone's feelings, or you have to bring them into the fold, right? You got to do one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so just to jump ahead a little bit, I think, once you've made that decision, like, hey, this person seems cool, I want to invite them, and you've invited them, you're probably wondering at that point, how could I do this cleanly? How could I do this so it won't disrupt the flow of the game? Because I've seen it, I've seen this in a lot of podcasts and a lot of campaigns where a guest player is just allowed to portray an important NPC in the story, right? Or a new NPC, right? Either one works, but they basically get to inhabit someone that's already in the world. And so it's no loss if they can't make it a week or if they stop playing altogether, right? Which is typically the case with these guest players. And so I think that's a great way to make it work seamlessly into your campaign.
Absolutely. In fact, just an example for my own campaign, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law moved down here I live in Utah. They moved here from Spokane, Washington for the summer. And my brother-in-law loves D&D. He's played, like when he's visited before, he's sort of done kind of guesting, right? But in this instance, he, a couple times actually, because his schedule was a little bit off and on, he made a character and then I sort of had the character just disappear, right, the first time. The second time, I had him kind of assume the role of a character, an NPC that the party was dealing with, and him creating the character profile for that sort of fleshed out the NPC a lot more. And then now that he left, just because he wasn't that the character wasn't that consequential, he was just sort of helping around. I didn't need to mention him very much at all, and the story continues. So that's something I would definitely recommend, like Tanner said, is when introducing the characters, you need to be deliberate about how you do it. Another example, I had my friend's brother-in-law join us because he had just gotten back from serving a mission to, I don't remember where he served, but he served a 2-year mission, so he was kind of new to being not serving people all the time, right? And I said, hey, join us for a little bit. I introduced him in a very specific way. It was in the Underdark. They found him, and he sort of latched onto their group because there was no one else. And then he actually ended up dying. So that was sort of like a perfect way to make it so he didn't, keep playing with us. But, that's another example. You just got to be very deliberate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that a key thing with a guest player, depending on your relationship with them and also what they're hoping to get out of it, you're going to want to tailor some of your gameplay or your DMing to that, right? If they're new to D&D, which I think that's going to be the case for a lot of these guest players, you're going to want to make the next few sessions where they're playing extra fun. And, you're going to want to have a variety of stuff. You're going to want to have combat that the guest player can actually do well at, right? So if they don't know how to build their own character, you do that for them. Or you have another player, you can delegate, right? Other players, they don't have to plan a whole session. Be like, hey, we're going to invite this guy. Can you help him build a character? Delegate it out. Save some time for yourself. And then make sure that that the character's built well so that they can roll well for like charisma stuff or for combat. But on the other hand, if they're more experienced, then then you might want to find out what they enjoy about D&D and make sure that the next few sessions have that specifically, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to also say at this point, we probably should have said it sooner, that before you get super excited and you're like, yes, I can finally invite this one person, you have to make sure it's okay with your group. I think that's one thing that I didn't do right when I've invited people before. I just sort of surprised my group. Luckily, they were awesome and they were actually excited about it. But going back in time, I would have sit my group down and said, hey, I want to experiment bringing guests in from time to time. Is that okay with you guys? When you do that, though, you have to be aware that it's very probable your players will, it's probable they will find someone they want to invite and bring to the table. And you're going to have to be at least willing to talk about that.
Yeah. And then, like, if they start bringing other people, then you also have to be more flexible, maybe in just your interpersonal reaction, just how you interact with them. Because the thing is, when it's you personally and you meet someone and they're like, oh, I love D&D, but then if you hate their personality, or at least if you're like, I don't really jive well with them, then you can just keep your mouth zipped, right? And you're like, they don't need to know that I'm running a DM session, or they don't need me to invite them. But if other players are inviting their own guest players, there's no guarantee, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that if it's a case like that, you want to let them know and be like, hey, yeah, we can, have them for a couple times. Like, set an expectation with your player who invited them that, like, yeah, we could do, this might even be a good opportunity to do a one shot or a two session kind of shot, right? Where you're like, oh, yeah, let's have them play. In fact, let's just do a separate one. And then you kind of like give that player a trial period in a way. You just want to be aware, because there's always the chance that someone enters your group of players who doesn't mesh with the rest of the people. And that's not bad on their part. It's not bad on your part. But sometimes it happens, and you just want to be aware and, set yourself up with some soft boundaries so that, you guys all still have fun.
For sure. And to that point, I think it's okay if anyone invites a guest, it's okay for you to sit them down or text them or call them and sort of coach them on the culture of the table and sort of the norms, as well as your expectations as a dungeon master. And it would be a good idea to do sort of the similar thing to other players at the table if you're bringing in a new guest, right? Because if it's, well, when I mean a new guest, a person new to D&D, if the other players are sort of not really helping them, then that's going to give them a bad experience. But also you want to talk to that person and coach them, because if they're sort of just stealing the limelight all the time, none of the other players are going to have a good experience. So you have to make sure everyone, like you said, Tanner, everyone is having a good time.
Yeah, if you've ever had, your mom or dad or someone, an adult, being like, hey, this person's new to the class or new to the neighborhood or something, can you make sure you play nice with them? Essentially you need to have that version of a conversation, a DM version of that conversation with your players, and be like, hey, this person's new, or hey, this person is really interested in playing but they're a little nervous. Please give them opportunities to speak. Don't speak over them. Include them in roleplay, and also give them suggestions if they have questions about how combat works. I think that's a very simple thing you can do. That a lot. If you have a good relationship with your players, they're gonna take that. Of course they will. Why wouldn't they? But beyond that, I also think that you need to, and I love what you said about like explaining the basics of the culture of gaming at your table, because we've said this before, where like, hey, when you first get a group of people together to become a long-term D&D group, right, you kind of have to set expectations of like, hey, this is how I run things. If you have any questions, do this. After a session, I'm going to talk to you about these things. You set expectations, kind of like a session 0 thing. And any guest player that comes in, they're not going to have that. And it's not necessarily fair that you don't have a brief conversation and be like, yeah, here's the things that are core to our party. Here's some basic rules that we have in terms of just interactions, and any questions,
Exactly. And honestly, just thinking back of the different times where I've invited people, I'm thinking of all these mistakes that I made, because I definitely didn't do those two, sitting my players down or sitting the guests down. And I definitely think that hampered the session. And actually, the session in question brings up another point that I recommend is when you bring in a guest, you do need to make sure the character fits in a story. It fits in the story in a way that the other player characters want them to sort of adventure with them. So the example I'm thinking of, my sister-in-law decided to try and play with us, and at the time my players were still in the astral sea, right? They were on a space station, and they had just gotten there, and my thought process was like, hey, as soon as they get there, this guest character will bump into them running from some other big creature, right? And then I have this whole plot of like this player character, or this guest character, had lost her memory, and she wanted them to help her, and they would go into the belly of this space station. They'd find this Oblex, and they'd fight it, and the Oblex had stolen her memories, and then she gets her memories back, and she realizes she's a time traveler, and she finds her ship and goes back in time, and then that's her session, right? But what happened was, she bumps into them. She's like, hey, this big guy's chasing me. The party scares the big guy off, and then they're like, who are you? And she explains, and they're like, okay, whatever, we don't care. And they just like went on their way. And so like this whole story of this character that I helped her make was just like gone. And it really made for sort of an awkward session for her, and that was her first session. I think I did her a big disservice in not making it a little bit more intertwined.
Yeah, that's a really great point, where it's like, especially if they're a guest player, you want fewer loose threads with how you introduce their character into the story. All right. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that might feel railroady, but you got to do it. Otherwise, you're lining up the dominoes in a way that's not going to be satisfying. Yeah. I also think that when you're thinking about this whole question, because I know we're wrapping up here, mm-hmm. but we've said a lot of things like, hey, do this, don't do that, consider these different points. In the end, I would really just encourage you, if you have anyone that you want to invite, do it. And maybe this is my parent moment of being like, hey, be nice. but basically, I think that D&D is such a fun thing that if you find someone that you have, the thought, or that your players have the thought, like, hey, this would be really fun to play with them, do it. D&D is a great thing because you can interact with people at a different level, and you can make friends, different friends, new friends. And so, if you don't take anything away from today, at least take away that you should try and look for opportunities to introduce people, not only to the game, but also to having a more fun time with you, right? And then hopefully, with experience and with some of this advice we've given you, you can kind of take it to the next level and prepare them better, prepare your party better, but failing all that, it's still totally worth it to invite a guest.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I think that is probably the biggest takeaway I would give is just try it. It will spice things up for your story because there's going to be a new face at the table. Everyone's kind of going to be abuzz with, energy just because there's new energy at the table. But also, if you need more reason, go look at Critical Role. They've done this a couple times. Go look at, High Rollers in the UK. They've done this a couple times. And it always makes for sort of a fun situation because you can call back to those characters, those sort of iconic characters that the guest played later in the campaign, and it sort of gives sort of a nostalgia effect, the callback. It's just a good all around thing. So, last thing we're gonna say is, do it, and let us know how it goes. You can actually reach out to us on Instagram. We are at How to Be a Better DM or at Monsters Rent, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah. We couldn't put the dot in there because Instagram's dumb. It should be monsters.rent, but it's at Monsters Rent. Send us a message. We'd love to see how it went. But we're going to be back next week for another awesome episode from me and Tanner. And until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.